Welcome back to Sika Strength and welcome back to Sika Stand. Today's new show, as always, is brought to you by the Sika Strength app on iOS and Android. As we often like to do, just like to show you a little PB from someone who's using the app. Just this weekend gone, our friend Rob hit a 220 kilo back squat. This is a 20 kilo PB. He was running the RTA 2.0. So squat only program, 2 sessions per week. Check it out in the link below if you suck at squatting. Or if you're good at squatting and you want to be even better at people who suck at squatting, you want to bridge or widen that gap. Now, speaking of people who are unbelievably good at squatting, Lee Sang finally squatted 270. So he put up this video. We were watching this in absolute, on the edge of our seats. There's warm-ups there. You see a 270. He fails it. We're like, oh, fuck. You think the video's over. And then he comes back and smashes 270. Because that first 270 was not reliable. That was not convincing.
No. And the other thing I was worried about as he's going up, he's doing a heap of reps on the wheel.
Heap of reps.
Like, there's absolutely no need to be doing 4 or 5 reps at 220, then a few reps at 240. 260 looked very good. 260 kind of looked better than 240,
For
if
sure.
I remember correctly. And then the miss came at 270. So definitely not expected. I definitely think he has a lot more in the tank here, but obviously he hasn't been doing any of those higher weight, lower rep sets recently. He's been doing a lot of incredibly high reps. He did... Was it 200 for 30 a couple of weeks back?
No, it wasn't. No, it was like 170 or 150.
Something mental for 30 reps anyway. But now he's here with a 270 kilo single. And I hope to God that he goes for around 3 weeks and really peaks his squat and just does 285.
Yeah, I wonder what the kind of limit for him is. He seems to usually train around 75 if you go by. Sometimes he mentions it in his posts. So he's moved up to the 73s. And again, like I say, looking at this 270, I was not convinced that he was going to make it because it was obviously nowhere near. Change up the loading on the barbell, a little bit less whip. You can even see he was rattling as he walks it out. And then he hits this 270. Pretty convincing. Right now, maybe there's a few more kilos. But again, like Dara said, if he goes for a bit more of a peaking phase and goes a little bit less crazy and doesn't need to do a 20 RM 2 weeks ago before the heavy single, maybe we might see something bigger.
Give the people what they want, Lee.
Now, Zhi Zhi Yong, giving people what they want, this 190 kilo clean and jerk. He said, don't call it a comeback. He's been here for years. That's LL Cool J if you don't know who that is. 190 kilo clean and squat jerk. Gotta say, it does look pretty good. Looks pretty convincing.
Looks fast.
The clean looks pretty reassuring.
Yeah, definitely. There's a few points in this lift where it looks better than what we've seen probably in the last 12 months. The first one is just how fast he stands up out of the clean position. Now, a lot of time people will point to that and say maybe his front squat numbers or his back squat numbers are going up. To be honest, it could be just better timing on that clean as much as anything else, just getting used to those heavier weights a bit more. But he powers up that front squat as he catches the clean. And then the second thing, which is arguably much more important, is just the speed underneath the jerk. So he is getting into that position a small bit better. Still some flutter in that elbow. There's still a bit of a question mark over it, but it definitely looks more confident from my point of view.
So we've basically got 2 months of training left before the Olympics, and then a week or two, which doesn't really count to just flying to Paris. They'll probably be there pretty far ahead of time. I know, for example, some of the Colombian lifters are currently in Spain, Miso's in Italy, so people are trying to migrate closer to that time zone, and all helps. If you've got that funding, typically we don't see the Chinese athletes doing that, but the 190 kilo clean looks very reassuring. Does look like there's maybe a 205 kilo clean there. The jerk not quite as good, but what is very important is that he's on a trajectory to improving. So this definitely looks better than he did at the most recent IWF World Cup in Thailand, the last qualifier. So he's on an improvement trajectory, and it's much easier for him to return to a good state than it is for him to improve on his current numbers. So if he can get back to top tip shape, hopefully we can see some good lifts at Paris. Now, speaking of people trying to get back into tip shape, we've got Lasha Talakatsi with this 190 kilo triple. I suppose you'd call it a cluster, 190 kilos. And I do think this looks pretty convincing.
Yeah, absolutely. This has made me happier than any Lasha lift in the last 3 years, I'd say. To be honest, just seeing how well this is moving makes a massive difference. We obviously had a few lifts from Lasha over the last couple of weeks. There was a number of question marks about the amount of knee rappage going on, and just generally speaking, how comfortable he looked with those lifts. But 190 here looks about as good as we've seen him move 190 in the last 2 years or so. So it does definitely look like things are improving. Maybe he's getting in better shape. Maybe this is just a slightly easier day of training, or he had a slightly easier week of training and things are looking a bit better. It's very hard to put a definite understanding around this with just seeing one video of the lifts, but things are looking good from this point of view.
I still don't think this is 500 kilo total good or 225, 270 good, but I still think it's some very good lifting for sure. So it's great to see him improving. So again, he's on a trajectory of improvement. It definitely looks like he's sharpening up, and if there's ever a training block for Zhi Zhi Yongs and Lasha to be putting their best training block of their life in, this would be the one to give it all and kind of put the foot down. So hopefully this looks pretty good for both of them, and obviously all of us are rooting for two absolute giants of the sport. One of them figuratively and one of them literally a giant of the sport. Here we've got Sergio Masida, Italy's sharpest technician, I would think, with this pretty crisp 160 kilo clean and jerk in competition. Very, very nice jerker. Really interesting thing about his clean, we've been talking about this lately, and it's kind of a thing that's come up a little bit from different lifters, and we talk about it a bit in terms of the extension you need on the clean. Sometimes in that conversation, the hip contact comes into that, and where should we be contacting? How much should we be extending? An interesting variation of this is that we see a reasonably high contact point for Sergio. Pretty normal, I would say. I think most people should probably be aiming for, although he does have quite a wide grip. But then he hits a pretty straight, long extension, long for the clean, but then is incredibly fast underneath. So the big thing we're always trying to focus on in the clean, the big thing we're always trying to push for the clean, is that getting under the barbell is the most important part of that. Some lifters, for example, an extreme example would be Anton Plesnoy. When he makes contact, he's focusing on that pull under really aggressively. Some other lifters then, from that early point, some other lifters then, like Sergio, are going to make a bit longer of an extension and still get under quite quickly. So it does come down a little bit to personal nuance and paying attention to what's going on. But the overriding focus all the time is getting under faster. The pull under is the most important part of the clean, because you cannot pull those heavy weights high, and that heavy weight obviously is relative to yourself and relative to those world records.
Now, speaking of getting prepped before the Olympics, I think nobody's under more pressure than Team Italy are. Definitely with the last kind of 12 months of competition performance, I assume everybody's feeling the pressure a small bit here. Obviously, Olympic medals mean a hell of a lot more than any of the other medals that a weightlifter is going to win, but you just hope that they're going to get all those issues sorted out pre-Olympics.
Here we've got Abbie Cooper of USA doing a hang clean at 122 kilos and then a squat jerk. So Abbie seems to exclusively squat jerk, and she is a 59 kilo weightlifter. So these are big time money weights, and a rigid bottom position for that 122.
Absolutely. A double body weight clean and jerk of any style is absolutely crazy. But then when you consider it's that kind of high hip or American high hip power clean, full clean, and then into a squat jerk, it just makes it all that more impressive. Now, I honestly think America as a country do more of that high hip or pocket hip clean than all the other countries combined.
Yes. Then we see a little bit sometimes of the Uzbekistan team doing high hip snatches, which can be useful in some cases, but we don't see anyone else doing these really high or hip cleans. So the hip clean is somewhat different to a high hang clean, because you're not moving the barbell down, you're literally moving into your power position, but there's no downward trajectory of the barbell, downward movement, so it doesn't really move in terms of further down your leg. There's kind of no bar pad, it just moves down with you but staying in the hip pocket. So it's not something we'd love to use in terms of athletes, but it does allow you to use some pretty heavy weights. Now, speaking of heavy weights, we've got Ryan Sester jerking 220 kilos from the rack, from the front, for another USA weightlifter.
What a great looking split jerk as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, we always rag on slow motion videos because they make things harder to view, if that makes any sense at all to you. But even this looks good in slow motion.
I think the big thing with split jerks is that if you make them go fast enough, it always looks good, even if you don't hit amazing positions. Like, it's still, if you can just power through a heavy weight, you can kind of get away. You can bamboozle people.
Absolutely. The other thing I love about this is he says that it's for 4 slabs of beef or something like that. And this is what 4 plates should be. 4 plates is 4 25-kilo plates on each side.
Yep.
It's not 180 kilos.
No, 4 slabs is the 4 reds. A lot of great lifts you can do with 4 slabs. You can power clean it. Yeah, that's a big lift for people.
That's a massive lift.
You can jerk it as well. 2 milestones for many lifters. Back to Team South Korea, we've got one of my favorite lifters from there, which is Jongbeom. So he put up some routine training. He puts up a lot of routine training. He's still a 96 kilo lifter. So a few weeks ago, he did 180, 220. We thought he'd moved up to 102, probably about 2 months ago now. But it turns out he was actually still a trainee. He's a 96, obviously a little bit overweight as 96, but massive lifts. But he's put up this 160 and 200 kilo sets.
Yeah, you mentioned Sergio's clean and jerk earlier being crisp. This jerk is Krispy Kreme donuts crisp. It is so good. The big thing we're always looking at with those jerk positions is just that ultimate timing of lockout. So initially breaking the bar off the shoulders, that continuation of the press through overhead, and then just that lockout and those landing of the feet being perfectly timed. And this is an absolute textbook example of that. So at the 180 going all the way up to the 100, we see that perfect timing of that catch position and lockout. Now he has the kind of stereotypical Korean quirk of stepping that front foot back very, very quickly, but it's definitely doing him no harm here.
So some of you might remember, if you've been in the sport for a while, well, and if you're in your second decade of weightlifting, you might remember that Team South Korea were notorious for missing split jerks. They could clean everything. A famous example was like Sejie Hyuk, which was one of the best 77 kilo lifters. And when we were in the training hall last year, we lift weights. This is a story outing him. I wanted Yang to ask them, why did they get so better at split jerking? What did they change? But he said it was too insulting. He said he couldn't ask them. I just wanted to know what they changed, because they have gotten a lot better at split jerking.
Yeah, across the entire team as well.
Yes. Now, sticking with that team, this lifter is one of the newer lifters on the national team, but he is an absolute horse, a stallion. Lee Seongwon. So he is a 96 kilo lifter as well. And he was, when we were there last year, was actually quite new to the team. And he was getting a lot of coaching, more than any of the other male side of the team, from the head coach. But he put up this 120 power snatch plus full snatch and into a 130 full snatch. Not massive weights. Well, obviously they're big weights for some people, but they're crispy weights.
I love how fast they are as well. Like that catch position on the power is kind of somewhat non-ideal, but the bar speed here is absolutely insane. We're always talking about this kind of continued acceleration through the whole pull, and for that reason sometimes people being too fast in their first pull actually holds them back a bit, because the barbell goes fast and then it slows down as it comes into the hip. Now in this case, you see the barbell going fast from the floor. It continues to get faster as it passes the knee. It becomes its fastest as he makes contact, and then has very, very good positions afterwards. So it is, a lot of us will try and lift with this kind of speed, but we'll kind of hold ourselves back because of it. But when you see an excellent practitioner like this, a really talented athlete, this kind of amazing speed off the floor is great to see.
I retract that statement. 130 is massive weights. I shouldn't have said. That's not fair. Most people who snatch will never snatch 130. So just for anyone, if you're snatching 120 or 30, it's huge. But what I really like about this is his back position. So you'll see what the Koreans are great at. South Koreans, actually the North Korean team are very good at this as well, is they're setting their back position. They do loads of pulls, loads of variations of pulls, loads of upper back work, but they're really good at holding that position. So for example, he has his chin up and he's arching that back. Now it mightn't look like maximum arch, but it's incredibly rigid and he's super patient with it. A big issue a lot of us is when we're in our start position, we're like, oh shit, this is 100% snatch. I need to get this going, and we really mess up your own snatching. And one of those things is messing up that start position. So you might be hitting that at lighter weights, but then when you get to really heavy weights, you just proverbially shit the bed and you end up losing that position. But you can see him here just hitting the same damn position every time, which is
every damn time,
which is incredibly useful. Now, one of my favorite lifters, Eko, is it Eko or Eko?
I always say Eko, but I could be wrong.
Eko, yeah, Eko sounds better. I think it is Eko, actually. I think you're right.
Eko Power
has been to 4 Olympics. I think this will be his 5th if he's going, and he's doing some rack jerks. He's a 61 kilo lifter, late 30s, Wait till you see these 170 reps from rack. Wait till you see from Team Indonesia.
Oh my God.
Go watch this with sound. I don't want to. Let's actually put on the sound. I'll give it the sound.
Put on the sound a little bit.
I want to put on the sound. Wait till you hear this. Reps.
I feel dirty watching that.
Oh my God.
It is just the speed and power there is absolutely unbelievable. What I love as well is he has a very optimized grip width for his jerk. A lot of us will try and go kind of wider and wider on the jerk to get that mechanical advantage, so we don't have to move the barbell quite so high. But obviously, as we go wider, we become less stable. You see, in Eko's case, he has a very wide grip for his height, but he is incredibly stable in that overhead position. So when you look at him, he's probably has the same grip width as somebody who's maybe a foot taller than him, but he is so stable in that overhead position. And if you want that wider grip width on your jerk, you have to be doing a lot of pressing. You have to have that very stable overhead position.
Next up, we've got Tu Yi, who I think is going to be one of the big rising stars, probably for the next Olympic quad after this. So we'll see a full 4 years now until we get to LA. So this is one of the 89 kilo lifters. We saw him just make the national team from China with the 205 in competition. And here from Kurt Album, who uploads some great lifts. So do go follow Kurt Album. 190. So this was his last session before the competition, and this is a great opportunity, I think, just to quickly talk about what your last week in weightlifting should look like, and this is how they should be looking. So you need to be objective with yourself, you need to be honest. You can't be forcing lifts. So if you haven't had a big training block, if it hasn't been going well, there's no point killing yourself for your last clean and jerk session, your last big clean and jerk session before the competition. They need to move like that, whatever the case is. If it's 80% of your max, so be it. If it's 95% of your max, great training block, but this is what they should be looking like. There's nothing to gain by merging yourself with those big clean and jerks before that competition.
Now, when we're coaching people, we're always getting them to look at certain lifters for certain attributes or certain things that are very obvious in their technique. And something that comes up really clearly in this video is how well he sweeps the barbell back into him during that first pull. So you'll see he has a quite low start position. Knees are quite far forward, which usually isn't ideal. Usually it leads to the barbell being out in front of us and kind of looping around our knees. But he does such a good job here of sweeping the barbell back to him, coming back to that fully vertical shin position at the end of the first pull, which means he is in the perfect position for a better second pull and then a better pull under after that.
Sorry, just surprise Ri Chang-song from North Korea.
Oh my God.
What the sugar. Holy
that looks fake.
Jesus Christ, that caught me out of the corner of the eye there. Here we've got Katie Estep.
Nailed it.
Yeah, nailed it. Another Team USA lifter. So she is a junior, still 19 years old, according to her bio, and she hit this crispy smooth 101 kilo snatch. Incredibly slick, very, very confident, nice and repeatable. A lot of great things about that lift, but one of those things is the fact that it's 101 kilos.
It's insane.
Yeah.
The big kind of standout thing technically for me on this is when we look at that extension. A lot of the time when the lighter weight class athletes or some of the youth athletes get to the top of the snatch, they'll tend to hang out for too long. So they'll really lean back at the top. They'll do something we refer to commonly as over pulling the bar, which leads to obviously them getting under the barbell slower, the barbell swinging out and away from them. Maybe they make too much contact with the hips. Now, in Katie's case, it's a perfectly timed, really vertical extension, which leads to a great pull under the barbell. And you'll see she bottoms out that catch position, is in a very, very deep squat. But because she hasn't spent too much time at the top, because she hasn't over pulled the bar, there's no major bar crashing down on her. And it leads to a very, very good technical and, as Owen said, repeatable snatch.
Yeah, sometimes you say things about weightlifting, I'm like, oh yeah, that's actually right. Next up, we've got Han Jian from Team South Korea. She is also a 59 kilo lifter, and she is hitting these block snatch doubles from 95 kilos. And the interesting thing about this is that we don't see a lot of the male side doing block snatches, and I'll say, if at all, very, very rarely, very small percentage of them doing block snatches, but we see a lot more of the higher blocks from the female side of the South Korean team. Now, as far as we're aware, the coaching staff are all the same. Now, there's obviously different coaches for different groups and different sections of the team, but the the global trend is kind of dictated like a corporation. Everyone's working from the same hymn sheet or the same programming sheet, as it were, and they seem to favour the block snatches more on the female side of things, which probably is a fatigue thing, so they're not pulling from the floor as much, so they can get a bit heavier weights. Possibly a good tactic to use there. There is some nuances for programming for female weightlifting and male weightlifting. Won't go into it fully now, but one of the things you'll see is that female weightlifters can stay near their maximal weights and push for a little bit longer. So in terms of the inside in that block, so if we're in a 12-week block and we're kind of regressing the loading a little bit at certain points, you'll see female weightlifters, even if we have the exact same body weight, exact same lifts, and exact same years old, which I've had lifters where they've been in similar situations with same squatting numbers even are very similar. You'll see that the female lifters can just go for a little bit longer, for a little bit higher volume, a little bit closer to max, possibly, let's say, a comparison of 4 weeks to 6 weeks or 6 weeks to 8 weeks. You'll see the female lifters can just keep moving along a little bit more in terms of weightlifting. Strength training, it's pretty similar. There's no major difference. But when it comes to snatch and clean and jerk, there is a notable difference in that. It's not massive, but it is certainly present. You can see across the spectrum.
Now, if you're listening to this and not watching the video and you're driving your car, I want you just to pull over and watch this for a second, because a very, very common thing, and we constantly have to coach people on it, is their head position in the overhead squat position. So you'll see as she catches the snatch here, she has basically her head stacked underneath the barbell and not shot through into this very far forward position. This is where a massive amount of amateur lifters, not even just beginner amateur lifters, but amateur lifters who might have been training for 4 or 5 years, will lose a hell of a lot of snatches overhead because they shoot their head forward, they get into that extended neck position, they'll start looking down at the floor, it just leads to a terrible upper back position. So this is exactly what you want. You want that head stacked underneath the barbell. You shouldn't have a big gap between the back of your head and the front of your bicep.
Now, huge weekend for powerlifting. So we had 2 all-time world records. We'll start with Colton, the limit breaker. So he did break some limits. So he came into his competition. He set a 110 kilo class all-time world record. It puts him as the best pound-for-pound powerlifter in Raw with reps. And this is the 5th highest total of all time. So he did a 440 kilo squat, missed 450, did a 245 kilo bench on his third attempt, and then he did a 435 kilo deadlift on his second attempt and missed 460 for his third attempt. So 23 years old, crazy lifting.
Yeah, it's really good to see as well. Obviously, we've been following Colton for the last couple of months with his lifts, and the question that came up over and over again was, when's he going to compete? And I love seeing this. I love seeing an athlete putting in the time in training, saying he's going to break the limits, like having that username, and then actually going out and doing it is amazing. I love to see it, just from the point of view of just sheer confidence in himself, and obviously it's fully deserved. Now, there's a couple of things with Colton's lifting that I think do deserve a mention. And the first thing is just on the squat. So for the last number of months, we've seen a number of squat sessions where the height was slightly higher during training, but when he came to competition, he has that depth there. So it is an interesting little nuance, training those slightly higher squat patterns. And it's something he talked about himself in the descriptions of the videos. He's saying, I know some of these were high, but it'll be there on the day. So it is interesting just to see that difference in people's training versus their competition. Now, the second thing is, and it's something we've mentioned before on the new show, is that sumo stance. So it's not a crazy sumo stance. It's not the kind of toes tipping the plates like we see some lifters doing. And it's obviously still sumo, but in my opinion, it's a much more consistent and a much better sumo lift to be training, rather than that going for that minimum range of motion sumo stance that we see some lifters doing.
Another thing I really like about Colton's bench press is, one of the big things we look for a lot is the forearm angle. So the elbow to wrist angle when they're benching is something we like to see to be pretty much vertical for most of the pressing motion, at least at the bottom. It's obviously going to open up a little bit at the top when we're using a wider competition grip, But when we're using that competition grip, I like to see it pretty well stacked at the bottom, and then we don't really like to see much flare, so we like to see that maintain under the wrist position. Now, some people will use the say that, oh, some big benchers flare a lot, and you're like, yep, some heavy squatters valgus a lot, but that's not something we want to be trying to encourage when people are lifting. And unless proven otherwise for yourself, if you're benching 120 now, don't be thinking, no, I'm an elbow flare. I flare elbows at 120. It's me. But realistically, if you're at 245 and you're flaring a lot, that's cool. More power, bench 240. But if we're further back from that, just be like, no, this is probably a technical error and not an individual nuance. You're best not to fool yourself with these things. You're best to aim for what's optimal, and then until proven otherwise, after several years of lifting, then make those big adaptations. It would make those quirks. So this isn't talking about certain grip widths and specific things. This is talking about things that would normally be seen as an error. Sometimes are things that the better lifters can get away with, but don't put yourself in that bracket. You're doing yourself a disservice in the long run. Now, the second all-time world record total, just gone from the weekend, is Deathgrip Derek Thistlethwaite, who set the 125 kilo class all-time world record, raw, so just who was wearing knee sleeves. Second highest dots ever, behind Mr. John Hack. He did a 400 kilo deadlift on his second attempt, didn't take his third attempt, benched 245 on his third attempt, and then he deadlifted 415 on his second attempt and didn't take a third attempt. So let's look at the squat first as we're looking at them.
So the lifts here are very, very sharp. They're really consistent. Obviously, in powerlifting competition, when we're at our maximal weights, usually the bar will move at its slowest speeds. And something that comes up over and over again is people will say, oh, that looked like it moves so fast. You have more kilos in the bank, or I think there's more there. That was only 90% or something along those lines. Now, it's worth saying that for most people, those speeds will vary quite drastically, whether you are slightly more biased towards fast twitch, whether your technique is more based on stretch shortening cycles. There's a number of things that will lead you to having faster or slowing squatting, pressing and pulling speed. So when we look at someone, whether the barbell is moving very fast or very, very slow is definitely not a good kind of marker of if it's their absolute max or not.
One thing I do want to mention on this is that Derek, like Colton, did a sumo deadlift. Now, both of them did what I call in my head at the moment as a not a bullshit sumo deadlift, where you're like kind of like Ed Cohen's. This reminds me a lot of Ed Cohen's style of deadlift, where it's sumo, but he looks like his feet are just on level with the rings, which is very, very narrow for a sumo deadlifter. There's a long range of motion, so it's not, 16-year-old deadlifting 320 kilos with fingertip grips and their plates. Their feet are in danger of getting guillotined by the plate. So this is, again, what I categorize as the not bullshit. I think it's an interesting thing that we're seeing more of these records. Not a long time ago, a couple of years ago, in the lifetime of powerlifting, maybe 10 years ago, not a lot of people were sumo deadlifting. We're seeing a lot of people move towards that. And there's this kind of idea that a lot of people have said, or some people on the sumo deadlifting camp said that it's not more favourable, but this is 2 all-time world records that we're seeing. And there's nothing wrong with using it. In the competition, if you're trying to win, you use the thing that's the best. And it's like when weightlifting moved from comparison, for example, from squat cleaning to split cleaning. So the split clean is definitely harder lift, and it's similar with the sumo. And we've mentioned this in the past. People have brought that up, and they've been like, "Yeah, well, why doesn't everyone split clean?" Or like, no, because the squat style is better, and it's similar for most people outside of that super heavyweight class. We're seeing the bigger lifts done with the sumo deadlift. Now, there's not going to be 100% conversion rate, but I think as the years go on, we're probably going to see a lot more of these all-time world records done with sumo deadlift and winning classes with it. And there's nothing wrong with that, but I think it's disingenuous to say that the sumo deadlift isn't more favourable for more people. In the same way the split clean was less favourable for more people in comparison to the squat clean, it's similar with the sumo and conventional deadlift trend. Is it more impressive if I split clean 240 compared to a squat clean at 240? Yeah, for sure. But it's just not what people do. It's not what the general population in that sport do. But anyway, either way, both for Derek and Colton, massive weekend for powerlifting. And it's great to see, these lighter guys, 125, 110, moving massive weights.
That's definitely the strongest moustache in powerlifting as well.
Very possibly. It surely must be. Now here we got Hafthor Bjornsson with a 460 kilo squat in a powerlifting competition. He said, "Who wants to see me attempt a 500 plus kilo squat and a 500 plus kilo deadlift on the same day?"
We do. These two guys
I
right
would
here.
like to see that for
We'd
sure.
love to see it. One thing that came to mind here is Hafthor is actually very, very well built for squatting. If he
Yes.
wasn't 7 feet tall,
Mm-hmm.
he has really nice torso to femur lengths. His squat looks really nice. I know it's kind of a low bar position, but his squat looks really good. Usually people who are that height have the insanely long femurs in comparison to their torso, but he is in a lovely position here.
So Thor took a big break. He went boxing. Now he's back strongman and taking a bit of a focus more on powerlifting by looks things, or the squat as well as the deadlift. He said it here, said it multiple times, that he's going to try deadlift more than 500 kilos and try put a big barrier on that and not use a suit, which would be put him in the realms as probably the best deadlifter or the heaviest deadlifter if he can do that kind of raw. So it'll be very interesting to see. Obviously, he's got 501 at the moment, but that was in a deadlift suit. There's conflicting reports on how much it really adds, but it certainly adds something, and the suit kind of crosses the threshold of something that is not quite raw anymore, I suppose is the best way of putting it. But this squat looks fantastic, and if he did something like that, if he did 500 plus on the same day as a 500 plus kilo deadlift with wraps and no suit on either, I think we'd be looking at literally one of the strongest feats ever, which is crazy. So next up, we've got one of the Japanese long jumpers, and he is doing some incredible single leg bounds into a long jump at the end. Now, any one of these single leg bounds is a very impressive broad jump for anyone, so a normal standing broad jump. But the length he's getting on these single leg bounds is absolutely astronomical, mind-blowing.
Yeah, I feel as I was watching the normal speed video of this, he gets a lot of horizontal speed coming into it. So his initial sprint is very, very good, and he gets a lot of distance then from it. Obviously, the fact that he's doing that single leg bound in between is very, very impressive. It's the same leg producing that force all the time, but it's just the distance he jumps at the end shocked me. I did not expect that to be that long. I did not expect it when it's just that single leg, like that's his fourth bound in a row essentially. It's an absolute insane feat of athleticism. You know, I think as well, like we're coming from strength and power sports a lot, and we deal with athletes from all other sports, and we'll tend to be very open when we say, oh, athleticism has many different forms, but there's something about jumping a long way or a very big height is just athletic.
Yeah. Now, speaking of people who are pretty athletic, we've got Ryan Crouser front squatting 250 kilos. So he said he was been chasing the elusive 250 for 7 years, but I feel like he could have done that before that, judging by how easy this is. So there looks like there's 10 or 15 more kilos here, certainly looking on the ascent speed. Now you might be wondering what's on the bar. It's not band resisted front squats, but it's some form of velocity meter or linear transducer. It's just a way of him measuring how fast that barbell is moving. Now, what use would this be on a max attempt? So this max attempt measuring is very, very useful because it gives you a relative point to measure all your other speeds on when the barbell is lighter, or if he front squat 250 again in the future, which we've seen him do with hang power snatches, he's going to compare the speed from what he did now to repeat. So maybe next season, or maybe if he goes for another Olympic quadder, for example, in 2 years' time, if he hits 250 but hits it faster than he did this time, that's good data. So rather than him having to go for a heavy front squat, which mightn't be super valuable, go for a new max, if he moves his old max faster, he knows he's progressing, or rather he knows he's progressing in relation to the part that matters for his sport, which is his power output. So he's moving that heavyweight faster, so he can safely say that, okay, I'm improving. I don't need to go for a potentially injury or high fatigue 260 kilo front squat next. I can safely stop at 250 and say, this is heavy enough because it's fast enough now. I have improved. Let's stick with the main goal, which is improving his sport. So it is valuable data to have. The big thing though is that you're not playing all your cards on judging your programming off your data. You're just looking at what you're doing smart programming, and then you're looking at the data as it moves and then interpreting it based on the results, not trying to predict based off of your session and trying to almost falsify results by trying to move barbells faster at lighter weights when it's not really doing anything for you.
Now, I have to be open and honest with you here. I don't get envy or jealousy very often, but I am green-eyed looking at Ryan Crouser's training shed. It is absolutely amazing.
It is, I think what the Americans call it is a barn.
A barn.
I think it's a barn.
Whatever it is, I want it.
I think it is a barn. Here we've got Samardeep, who is a Indian thrower, and he's hitting this hang block power clean, or rather it starts in the blocks, but he does a hang power clean with it at 180 kilos, which is massive weights to be moving, and he looks pretty fucking tall as well.
Yeah, he doesn't really do any dip and drive. It's almost a hang from that kind of hip style hang clean, but there's no real bringing the bar down and developing force. He basically just pulls the bar up and pulls himself under. It's insane. It's a very short dip and drive.
It is very short, very explosive, very power.
Very power. Like usually for the throwers, we'll see far more of that kind of swing, or for the weightlifters, we'll see them bringing the barbell down much, much lower. But in this case, just very power, very smash.
Here we've got Satoshi Ishii, which was the youngest Japanese gold medalist in judo, I think. He hit gold medal in Beijing when he was 20 in the 100 kilo class, and he is a avid mixed martial artist now. He does some actually no-gi judo competitions from time to time, but primarily a striker. He's living in Croatia, and he put up this picture of him. He's usually around 110, 112-ish kilos from what he's fighting and he puts up. He said with the caption, he said attention seeker.
Yeah, he's in some nick, isn't he?
Beast of the week, I would surely say.
It's crazy to think that he's basically a retired Olympian.
Yes.
So he might come up in the gym, some be like, oh, he's just a retired fighter,
Well.
And then he's obviously retired from judo.
Yeah.
And then he absolutely smashes your head through the concrete.
It's
scary.
That's the shape you want your athletes to be in.
Yeah.
You're like, okay, we've got a healthy level of fat mass here, but we've maximized our muscle capacity and we're not hanging around and wasting any space in the weight class.
That gap between your traps and your ears is the smallest it could possibly be.
Now, here we've got an Italian hurdler. He is the current European champion. He is 22 years old, Lorenzo Simonelli, and he hit this 140 kilo power clean from the floor. A lot of big things about this, but one of them is the fact that it's 140 kilos. You just don't expect this from the hurdlers. You just don't see a lot of these big lifts that often from hurdlers. They're usually a little bit lighter, but it's a pretty crazy coincidence that he's the European champion and he's moving 140 like this, I think.
Yeah, it's the standout thing for me here, usually when we see athletes, and this isn't a snide remark or anything like this, but usually when you see athletes, technically they're not great with the power clean. They might do a lot of power cleans, but they'll generally do a couple of things. They might bend their arms a bit early, they'll generally smash the bar a bit too hard, and their catch positions usually aren't great. Now, you don't see any of that happening here. It's really, really good, and that lack of massive hip smash at the top of that second pull is a noteworthy thing. If you're trying to be as fast and as powerful as possible as a runner or a hurdler or a jumper, the big hip smash with the bar isn't useful. The big hip smash with the bar is useful if you're a thrower or a rugby player or a football player. You need to get good at catching those big heavy weights. But in terms of just developing that really fast, explosive extension of the knees, extension of the hips, just that smoother contact is so much more beneficial.
Also of note is that he's not using straps, which is not something we'll see used often with athletics people when they're using the power clean or block power clean or some variation of that. They'll very often have straps on, so that is quite interesting that he's not using them. They'll even use straps from the floor. Very often we won't even see the power cleans from the floor. Usually it will be a variation, so a lot of great things about this lift. And the big thing about that is he can probably reproduce this technique fairly frequently, so he can get a lot more value out of it, so he can repeat weights close to this. So there's not a huge difference in relation to what he's trying to get out of his power clean between the weights of like 132 to 130 or 130 to 140. If he can move 130 for 5 singles like this 140, he's getting a lot of the benefit. Whereas if he did a big 140, super messy, very inconsistent above 120, it's useful that he can do it once, but he can get a better training block going if he can reproduce this style of lifting. So technique in terms of consistency is very, very important. If we can be better technically. We're probably going to be more consistent technically with the lifts we're moving. So it is good to be in good position. So then when we try to train and we can get good blocks in, we can reliably aim to hit more of those bigger lifts more consistently and hopefully get a better impact on our performance. Now, here we got Nicholas Meregali deadlifting 227 kilos, or the 500 pound club. If you were watching his YouTube, he's doing a road to the ADCC, and he did this 227 kilos, and he said it was a big goal for him. So it's a big weight. He's arguably one of the best gi jiu-jitsu players going at the moment, possibly the best. It's a bit hard to say weight classes, obviously, but he's without a doubt one of the best, and definitely going to be one of the best no-gi grapplers. So this is really interesting, and you can see Jimmy behind him. Jimmy's been on the news show before, another absolute monster, but it's no coincidence that this is moving like this, and he's got someone who's well versed in lifting coaching him.
Yeah, absolutely, and that is one thing that immediately comes to mind when we see this style of training. It is the fundamental strength lifts being used. It's not weird Bulgarian bags. It's not some strange pipe with a load of water sloshing around in it. It's big lifts, heavy weights, moving well with good technique. And obviously, Jimmy has been on the new show before for some crazy big lifts, but it's good to see Meregali's training now going down along the same lines. Big deadlifts. We saw some big, heavy seal rows, some good squats in there as well. So it is really good to see. It's definitely something we'll probably do a video on at some point in the future.
Recently, we said that when we're looking at judo people and we're looking if they want to be the most competitive judo artists they can be, we're probably looking at or trying to get close to that double body weight squat, maybe a kind of 2.2. Getting over that is very, very useful. After that, then it can be useful, but not absolutely paramount to get there. And a lot of people can get there. Quite a few people in judo confirmed, they were like, yeah, they would see lots of high level people doing this. It's not a big deal for a 60 kilo judo person to squat 120. Loads of them focus on strength training because it's a sport you can't hide from it in. And it's a little bit different. You get to the heavier weights, but not hugely. But in jiu-jitsu, people are asking, would we look for these same values in terms of the squat, for example, a high bar squat to pretty deep? And the answer is no. In jiu-jitsu, we're pretty happy if an athlete can squat body weight for a couple of repetitions. The standard's a little bit lower. Will that change in the future? Maybe. It remains to be seen. The great thing about jiu-jitsu is in some ways it's kind of a true meritocracy, or as close as you can get to in sport. You can find ways around. There's different ways to achieve a similar goal in jiu-jitsu, but everyone benefits from being a lot stronger. But when we're looking at jiu-jitsu athletes, we're kind of looking at, can you squat body weight for 5 or 6 reps is a pretty decent standard, certainly at least for the average jiu-jitsu goer. Now, if you can get heavier, we've had black belts win Europeans and they could squat nearly 3 times. Nearly 3 times body weight. Good form, similar to what we see with the judo athletes, that really below parallel position, really consistent repetitions. We've had younger athletes squatting kind of close to double body weight, doing very, very well in jiu-jitsu competitions. But a big thing a lot of you can make use of in jiu-jitsu is the deadlift. You can get big weights in deadlift with good form without having to be as technically proficient as you would need to be in a squat to have a double body weight squat. The squat is a simple movement, but it takes a lot to get it right at heavier weights. But we do see in jiu-jitsu benefits hugely from the deadlift, from trying to sweep people to not getting swept from people, maintaining your position in the stand-up. Having a big deadlift is usually a little bit easier for lifters to get. Now, if we can have a big deadlift and a big squat, very, very useful. But the deadlift is one where you can move a little bit more ground. Now, if you want to improve your deadlift, check out the Sikastrength app on iOS and Android. There's a 2-day-a-week deadlift program on the app and lots of big PBs on that. So you check it out below. Everyone gets a 7-day free trial. So with that said, thank you for watching today's news show. Thank you to everyone who DMs it in. I look through every single DM. I look at every DM someone sends in. Everything gets looked at. Everything gets filtered. We look at them and we're like, no, can't include that this week. Or we try and keep it under the 50 minutes at least. Try aim for that 40, 45, which we're on about now. So thank you to everyone who sends those in. We have to be a little bit cutthroat some weeks. So do please keep DMing those to us. It means a lot and we're very, very grateful for it. Hope you're enjoying the news show and let us know what your favourite bit this week was.